Surrealism has been a part of cinema since the beginning. Many filmmakers have made their attempt to explore various themes and subject matters through the unique advantages that are granted to them by surrealism. While there are certainly elements in director Federico Fellini's first few films from the 1950s that might hint at stepping a bit outside the, at the time dominant, Italian neorealist style, few could have predicted just how far away from that style he would move in the coming years, and how deep a plunge he would take into the off the wall, pure dreamlike surrealism. While his 1960 smash hit La Dolce Vita certainly showcased his move away from neorealism, it's his next film with which he would make the full transition into fantasy. That film was Eight and a Half. Fellini makes no reservations about what kind of film this is right from the onset, as the film opens with a scene of Marcello Mastroianni's character, Guido, experiencing a dream in which he is in a traffic jam and begins to float in midair and eventually far up into the sky. As he gets yanked down by a rope around his leg and begins to fall, we see him wake up, startled. Right from the get-go, we are thrown into Fellini's carnivalesque world of dreams, fantasies, and memories. Many filmmakers have made films about filmmaking, but none quite as personal as Eight and a Half. Most choose to focus more on the business side of things, the logistics of actually making a film. But for Fellini, this doesn't seem to be of much interest. Fellini focuses more on the emotional side of filmmaking and the state of mind of the director, here played by Mastroianni, who essentially plays Fellini himself. Fellini lets all of his own frustrations, interests, and desires play out on full display throughout the film, as his cinematic doppelganger, Guido, journeys from one encounter to the next, all accompanied by a sense of malaise, yet also excitement at the same time. It's in the real-world segments that we find the malaise that Guido feels, yet when we are transported into his mind during the surreal segments, we find that excitement that Guido is striving for, the inspiration that drives him to make films, and it's that lost inspiration that now drives his desperate search for meaning in his life and a clear path forward, as right from the start of the film, we see a certain detachment from him. Everyone wants to know what his next film is about. Producers are getting fed up with his uncertainty about the project. Actors are desperately trying to get his attention for a role in the film. Critics are blasting him for his ambiguous messages in his films straight to his face. And his marriage is falling apart as he further pursues his mistress. He drifts from one scenario to another, all with the same detached, hollow attitude. The entire film is about his search for what his film is even about. He searches so desperately for meaning instead of letting meaning find him. Throughout the film, Guido questions if what he's making is even worthy of people's attention. He continues to get criticism saying that nobody benefits from him putting his own personal problems on screen for people to watch, and is accused of being egotistical for it. And he begins to believe it after a while. And what he's putting on screen doesn't even have much of a coherent narrative thread, as a critic points out to him. And we can even see that later on for ourselves, as everybody involved with this film are watching the audition tapes from actors, with all of them waiting for Guido to finally make a decision, even just one decision, as he's been putting this film off this entire time we've known him. And during these audition tapes, we can see the uncanny similarities between his own life, of which we've seen much of by now, and the script that he's put together. A character even refers to the protagonist of his film as unsympathetic, and struggles to understand how an audience could be interested in such a character, and in such an ambiguous, undefined plot. And although we don't see the main character to Guido's film in any context, by everything else we've seen throughout the film, we can gather that Guido probably modeled the character off of himself, just as he modeled everything and everybody else in the film after his own life, just as Fellini himself has done with the very film we are watching. And if Guido's fictional character in his film is indeed modeled after him, then this character's criticism is partially true. Guido himself is somewhat of an unsympathetic character, who lies and cheats and doesn't even have any real sense of purpose throughout the film as he wanders from one scene to the next, much of which aren't exactly connected. But what Fellini is showing is that there is merit to such narratives, that it can be simultaneously true that it is egotistical and yet provides something of value to not just the creator, but also the audience. Fellini shows that there is merit to throwing one's own personal struggles on screen, as while not everyone will ever relate to every single character, we are able to see the truth and authenticity in creating narratives that revolve around people, or feelings, or subject matters that are familiar and personal to the filmmakers. In La Dolce Vita, Fellini began to experiment more with point of view, having since moved away from neorealism. That experimentation ramps up in 8.5, with many of the shots in the film being from the perspective of Guido, with the characters almost looking straight into the camera as if we were Guido, or Fellini were Guido. Shots will often have the characters looking in the general direction of the camera, with Guido just off screen, to then later in the shot come into frame. This not only puts us more in Guido's shoes, but helps to create the surreal feeling of the film. There are times when it takes a moment or two to realize that we are now in a dream sequence, or that we have now returned to the real world, and these alternating perspectives of the camera helps to increase the fluidity between these two worlds. By the climax, we're not fully sure of what's real and what's imagined, as Guido is physically forced onto the set of his own film by the producers and is being bombarded by questions from reporters. The scene very much feels like it at least begins in reality, as the previous scene ended with some of the producers coming to Guido to pick him up and tell him that they're shooting tomorrow. It then transitions into the scene, but then somebody tells him through all of the chaos that they've given him a gun. Guido takes this gun underneath the table while trying to escape the swarm of questions and shoots himself. At this point, we believe that he really has killed himself. But then we see Guido up and walking just fine. So clearly some parts of the scene turn out to be real and some false. But instead of trying to discern where exactly we switched from reality to fantasy or fantasy to reality, we are simply experiencing Guido's final destination in his arc through the surreal nature of the film. Because that death of his, we now realize, was metaphorical, not literal. It was a rebirth of sorts, as all the chaos that he has been bombarded with just before he shoots himself has now disappeared. The set is calm now, and he finally admits his faults to his wife and concedes that he was indeed trying too hard to make sense of his life, instead of letting meaning find him. But now he gets all of the important figures in his life that we've seen throughout the film to hold hands and dance around in a large circle around the set, with him and his wife joining them. And we see that Guido has finally made peace with all of the disparate pieces of his life, and despite the madness of it all, has learned to live in harmony with them.